Well, good afternoon, colleagues, and we'll just begin the council meeting. I'm a couple of minutes late. I apologize for that. A young person named Braden stopped by the office and wanted to sit in the chair to try it out. He's thinking about running for mayor, I think, in the 2030s at some point, and so I took a couple of extra minutes with him, so thank you very much for your patience. Today, we welcome Helen Hibbert to sing the national anthem. Helen is a Juno-nominated Canadian singer and songwriter. I'm not sure why Juno really rings a bell for us here around the Council Horseshoe tonight. She's traveled to the United States in pursuit of her vocal career, achieving a full scholarship to the Carver College in Atlanta, Georgia. Helen graduated with an Associate of Arts degree majoring in music, and she's written over 25 original songs, and she's recently released her music videos on YouTube. Helen sings because she believes music is a universal language. It's created to touch the heart and to move the soul. If you'd like to hear more of Helen's music, be sure to attend Friday Night Lights. This is an upcoming event here in London on November the 3rd at 7 p.m. The event will be held at the Ramada Inn. Colleagues, please stand and please join me in the singing of the national anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, our true north, strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God, keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much. Well, colleagues, that was remarkable. Today, I would also like to begin the meeting by welcoming Justine Turner to Council today. Come on up, Justine. Justine is the great-granddaughter of the originators of the Emancipation Day celebration. Welcome to Council Chambers. Each year, September 30th marks the Emancipation Day celebrations, a day to celebrate the freedom of slavery. And London, Ontario marks an important location where many slaves fled to via the Underground Railroad during the 1850s to escape being captured and returned back to the United States. You may have seen it before. It's this massive tree. It's called the Meeting Tree. And the tree is a significant part of our local history. It's located deep within the forest at Westminster Ponds. Westminster Pond was an ideal place for them to settle and rest. It was a place of safety and of refuge. Because of this, they were able to create a home for themselves here in London. And it's so important that we continue this conversation, educate individuals about Emancipation Day. I'd like to recognize September 30th as being that day. I look forward to joining you again this year and celebrating at Westminster Ponds. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that and we can get some more people to come out. Thank you so much for being with us today, Justine. And I have to say, if you haven't been out to see the meeting tree, it's absolutely worth a trip. As I understand it, it was a massive tree in the 1850s, and it still is. It's got to be the oldest tree here in London, and an entire forest has grown up around it. And you have to walk out a fairly good hike from Westminster Ponds, the parking lot, to get there. But when you get there, you know you're touching history. You know you're touching something that is almost magical, and it says a lot about London, I think, as a community as well. So I'm going to hand things over to you, Justine.
Thank you, Your Worship, Matt Brown, and fellow city councilors. This event, as Mayor Matt Brown just mentioned, the Emancipation Day celebration, it was started in 1948 by my great-grandparents, Christine and Frank Housen, at Springbank Park. It went consecutively till 1987. It was handed down after the years to my grandmother after the passing of my great-grandparents, and after the passing of my grandmother, my parents continued it to 1987. Trends changed with the families, and it went on a hiatus for over 20 years. And in 2012, I orchestrated with Urban Forestry and the City of London to make this beautiful red oak tree a heritage tree, and it's the only heritage tree in London. So the Urban Forestry and Ontario Forestry, we all got together, and it's the only heritage tree in the City of London, and so almost 700 years old. And it was so in 2012, we had this beautiful ceremony during National Tree Week. I decided the following year, in 2013, to take Emancipation Day celebration out of its 20 years hiatus, being the fact that the tree, now titled the Meeting Tree, was very significant, as Mayor Matt Brown was saying, with the Underground Railroad. Trees were very significant in the Underground Railroad. When the slaves were fleeing to the areas to the land of freedom, which was Canada, preferably Canada for them, trees were their landmarks, as we have our landmarks like the Grand Theatre, the City Hall. Their landmarks were trees. And this tree in specific was their landmark here. And this tree is as Mayor Matt Brown, he mentions magical. It's divine. I feel the presence of God around this tree. It's truly amazing. And God was huge with the slaves when they fled to the land of freedom. And we just heard Mrs. Hebert singing, and Negro spirituals were huge with them. And we're going to have some major music involved. Mayor Matt Brown's going to be there. We're honored to have his presence. And not singing. Yes, you are. What are you talking about? Okay. And we have our local singer, Sarah Smith, who's going to be singing some major gospel music. And we have a young lady who goes to CCH. Her name's Jenna Gulsack, and she's going to be singing Amazing Grace. We're going to have prayer around this tree done by Reverend David Norton from the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. But the whole reason of having this is to really recognize Emancipation Day, take it out of its hiatus, as I did in 2013. So this is its 5th year back from a long retirement. Uncle Tom's Cabin in Dresden, Ontario has a major Emancipation Day in end of July. We decided to have Emancipation Day this year during National Tree Week, being the fact that it's all about, it's the tree is involved, and it's a great tie-in. And Jillian Spence, who is the manager of Urban Forestry, will be speaking as well, including Joe O'Neill, a local historian. So it's going to be a wonderful event. And like I said, I'm really, really grateful and honored to have Mayor Matt Brown be with us this year. It's going to be wonderful. I know he was with us a few years ago, he and his young son. So it was nice to see them, both of them matching in blue that day. So yeah, it's going to be a beautiful event. September the 30th, between 12 p.m. and 4 p.m. at Westminster Ponds behind Parkwood Institute, as we know as Parkwood Hospital. And the entrance is off of Commissioners Road, the major entrance between Parkwood Institute and London Health Science Center. So straight to the back, you'll see signs. There'll be volunteers pointing you to the direction. And as Mayor Matt Brown did say, it is a bit of a hike. However, we're going to have a bus. And the bus is going to shuttle everybody from the picnic area, which is on top of the hill where the baseball diamonds are, you'll see all this in case you're not too familiar with the area, taking you to the trail, and then we get off the bus and we walk to the tree. And it's a beautiful, beautiful day. I hope you all can make it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justine, for being here. Okay, colleagues, let's take a look at the agenda, including the addeds. We'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner, Councillor Park.
Thank you, Your Worship. To declare a conflict of interest on number 5 of the 16th report of the Strategic Policy and Priorities Committee. It's with respect to the Opioid Working Group. My employer, the Middlesex Land and Health Unit, is involved with that initiative. Also with number 10 of the 12th report of Community and Protective Services with respect to businesses, licensing bylaws, and most specifically with the respect to adult entertainment establishments where health inspections are conducted by the Middlesex Land and Health Unit, my employer.
Councillor Park.
Thank you. I declare a pecuniary conflict on agenda item 13 from the 17th report of Planning and Environment Committee in relation to 440 Grey Street as my family owns a neighboring property.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I'd like to declare a pecuniary interest on clause 7 of the 16th report of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, specifically in the project management plan tasks 5.3 and 6.12, which relates to ongoing discussions with my employer, Western University, as well as clause 11 of the same report, which has to do with an appointment to the Board of Governors of my employer as well.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Anyone else? Okay. Let's move through the agenda. We have a review of confidential matters to be considered in public. There are none, so let's then move into closed session for the reasons outlined. Councillor Morgan.
Your Worship, at this time, I would like to make an inquiry to add a reason to go into closed session. And as we've done this previously, there's a couple of steps in that order to change inquiries up, do the change of order, make the inquiry, and then the substantive motion to add a reason to go into camera. So it's all on a piece of paper. It'll come up on the screen. I'd like to do that. At some point, I have to read the reasons. I assume the clerk will tell me when.
Why don't you start off with the inquiry now at the top of the page, and we'll work our way down through. We'll get you leave first, I think.
Change in order first.
Okay, change of order. Moved by Councillor Morgan, second by Councillor Turner. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Salim.
Yay?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
Councillor Morgan.
So I would like to make an inquiry related to a matter pertaining to personal matters, including information regarding identifiable individuals with respect to employment-related matters, advice or recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, including communications necessary for that purpose, of providing instructions and directions to the officers and employees of the corporation, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose.
It's been moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 13-0.
Okay, what do we got next? Okay, so that takes care of that. Are there any other added reasons, Kathy, that we're going in camera outside of those included on the agenda?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, so let's have that come up on screen. That's been moved by Councillor Deputy Mayor Hubert, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Okay, members of the public watching from home, it's 4:20 now. We'll be going into closed session for no longer than about 55 minutes. We'll be out no later than 5:15. If we don't make it through all of the business in closed session, then we'll return to closed session at the conclusion of the public portion of the meeting later this evening. I believe, colleagues, we're in committee room 3. Okay, thank you, colleagues. So, quick in-camera session, moving on with the agenda. We'll look for confirmation and signing. Actually, Councillor Turner. Yeah, we'll look for confirmation signing of the minutes of the 22nd meeting held on September 4th, 2017. Thank you. Councillor Helmer moved. Councillor Turner seconded. Let's call the question. Voting. And communications and petitions, including added. There are a number of added, at least.
Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Safety.
Right. Councillor Zapian, did you want to vote manually? Yay. Okay.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
So a number of communications and petitions, a couple of addeds, 3 and 4. We could have a motion to refer those to the appropriate area of the agenda. It's up on screen now. Look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Salih, seconded by Councillor Park. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Ridley. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Let's move to reports. This is, motions of which notice is given. There is a motion here, and I'll look to Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It'll be coming up on the screen.
Moved by Councillor Squire and seconded by Councillor Salih. This is for leave only. Let's open the vote. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On about a week ago, I had the pleasure of speaking at the closing ceremonies of the Frosh Week at the University of Western Ontario, and I had the distinct pleasure of publicly embarrassing my 18-year-old daughter in front of her entire Frosh class, which is one story. But the other part of it is that I said at that time how important it was, I thought, for students to become involved in their community, students from outside of the community. And almost immediately after that, I was contacted by a young man who is with us today, and he's sitting in the gallery. Welcome. His name is Prashir Pazricha, and he is an 18-year-old student from Mississauga, and he is in his second year at Western University. He's also contributing to his community, and he's on the executive of the 2017 Western Charity Orientation Committee, which I commend him for. He's pointed out to me that in 1981, the United Nations General Assembly declared the International Day of Peace to be a day dedicated to celebrating and strengthening the timeless and global value that lies in achieving world peace. It's unofficially now known as World Peace Day, and it is observed by all 193 UN member states on the 21st day of September. And I know he can't speak today because it's council, so I'm going to speak his words, if he doesn't mind, and tell you what he said in reaching out to me. He said, "I am reaching out to you as a Western student, a young adult, but most importantly as a human being, and request that council consider my request for the International Day of Peace. Unfortunately, world peace at times seems like such a distant concept that human beings often find it fruitless to work towards. In today's world, the importance of Canada exemplifying its dedication to world peace cannot be undermined. I truly hope for London to act as a beaming light of hope and unity on the 21st of September, not just this year, but every year, and for it to act as a role model for human beings around the world to stand as one united team. As an 18-year-old in today's world, it feels too early to be losing hope in our world and in humanity. My generation needs more role models in the world that promote the values of world peace, humanitarian aid, and unity. I hope that London City Council takes this into consideration, makes this decision. Your support for World Peace Day would inspire not just the current leaders of our world, but its future. And I think it's very well said, and I don't think anyone could have said it better. The request is that we allow, although he's obviously not an unincorporated association, that we allow our buildings to be illuminated in blue and white on September 21st, 2017, to recognize International Day of Peace. I couldn't be prouder of him. To have him come forward like this, and I hope we will support this. You know, students are in my ward, and I represent them, and I've always made it clear how proud I am to represent them. And when you meet an 18-year-old who follows through and does this, it makes me feel great, and I know we all support students too. So I'm hoping we'll support this, and congratulations and thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing this forward, Councillor Squire. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for taking the lead on this as well. The motion is already being seconded by Councillor Salee. That'll come up formally on screen in a moment. Any other speakers? Councillor Salee?
I just want to indicate that I'd be supporting it, and thanks for reaching out to us, and it's great to see your involvement in such an important matter. So thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also am very proud of this young man because he reached out to me also, and I promised him that I would be seconding this motion. And I'm really proud that we could get a young person like this to come forward and do things like this. I think it's essential that we encourage them and we support them in every way. But outside of that, this is a remarkable request, and I think that it's very, very good that we of London could show that we support this International Day.
Other speakers? Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. Let's call the question. And we are voting.
Councillor Usher. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Okay, that motion passed unanimously. That means that on September 21st, City of London buildings and amenities where we have the facilities will be illuminated blue and white. Thank you again for bringing that forward. We meet now for the next 4 or 5 hours. You're more than welcome to stay, but if you needed to go, then we'd understand as well. Thanks for being here today. Okay, colleagues, let's move then to the 17th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. The Vice Chair, Councillor Turner, was chairing that meeting.
Your Worship, thank you. I proudly present the 17th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. I believe 11 and 13 are being asked to be pulled. Are there any others? Is that your word? Oh. Oh, okay, with that, with that, Your Worship, I'd put the balance 1 through 14, save 11 and 13.
Okay, so that was 1 to 14 with the exception of 11 and 13. And Councillor Squire says hello. Any discussion on any of those clauses? Okay, let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
And as I was on the opposing side of the motion on 11, I believe, I will need someone else to put that forward.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Okay, so this is 11, Conservation Review, Board Recommendation, Notice of Intent to designate 4402 Colonel Talbot Road. Any speakers? Councillor Turner, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's important to note what happened here in terms of the procedure and process. Back when this was first brought forward in front of Council and the Planning Committee before that, Council voted unanimously to confer heritage designation to this site. It had a very thorough and robust analysis from our heritage planner, Kyle Gagnon, who has, we recognize he has fairly extensive expertise. This was appealed to the Conservation Review Board, and at the Conservation Review Board, there was some discussion at that time about whether Mr. Gagnon would qualify as an expert witness. Procedurally, we can debate what happened there, but ultimately, in that circumstance, Mr. Gagnon wasn't admitted as an expert witness, and so unfortunately, his status at the board, I worry and fear didn't have as much weight as it should have. I don't think there's any question about Mr. Gagnon's credentials. I think in any board, if you read through the board's hearing, that sounds like more than anything, it was a procedural matter, more than any question about his credentials or his ability to be entered as an expert witness. But ultimately, the end result was putting a non-expert witness against who should be an expert witness, and the review board siding with the non-expert witness. I have some issue with that. I think the merits of this property are significant enough that do warrant heritage designation. And if we recall back when we first did our first pass, the will of this council was unanimous to confer that heritage designation on the property. There are also some other components to this, because the setback that was granted for the building is based on the fact that the building that's there would remain on site. We would not normally allow such a far and remote setback from the street for any building unless we had to preserve for heritage reasons. So there's a whole number of reasons why I'd ask you to make sure that we do still go forward with what our unanimous decision was last time we went through this and confer the heritage designation. So I disagreed with the conclusion of the committee last week. I voted against it. The vote was 3-2. And so obviously it gets kicked over here for us to make that decision. So I do recognize that there was some competing interests, certainly. A lot of discussion from the community. The applicant did a significant amount of work to bring members of the community on side to support the applicant's position. But nonetheless, the proposal that was put forward to us included incorporation of the heritage asset, and then was ultimately now is looking at a complete demolition and a new build on the site. I don't concur with that position. I think everything that was put forward by Mr. Gagnon and his analysis of the property was appropriate, and I think we need to be moving forward with its designation.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this property is in my ward, and I did support the withdrawal of the designation for this building. And it was a very difficult decision for me to make. And I just want to take you back to a couple years ago when I stood in front of you and talked about how this application for rezoning was a successful story to me. It was taking an old building, reusing the old building. The applicant was agreeable to that and worked with staff, and the community was on board. And it was, to me, something that I thought was really encouraging to have these relationships and everyone sort of on side. So subsequently, a demolition request came in, and now we are dealing with a designation of the building. And to me, what has happened during this time, this 1.5 years or so, the applicant has worked very hard with the community. to show them the new designs of the building that's he is proposing. And the community, I have heard from loud and clear that they are in agreement with this new building. I wish we had more opportunities, I as a counselor and staff, to come to the open house meetings the applicant had for the community. But I did hear very strongly the support from the community. So this is difficult because I am such a strong supporter of heritage and the environment. It's in my DNA. It's usually not something that I take very lightly. It is very, very important to me, but it's also important to me what the community says as well. I understand that the building has to be valued by the community. And I have not heard from the community that it has value. And I have to listen to what the community is telling me. I have not heard another side. So, unfortunately, the community does not share my perspective on heritage. I've heard from them over and over that they would prefer a new building. They no longer want to live next to a deteriorated building. That is not what they want. And so that is why I'm supporting withdrawing the designation request. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Park. Anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff. Unfortunately, I was not at the planning meeting as my friend here and I were in Alberta representing London at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, but I wonder if you could reiterate how the process from the Conservation Review Board plays in juxtaposition to the role of council.
Your Worship, the recommendation that comes from the Conservation Review Board is, after the hearing, is simply a recommendation. It's up to Municipal Council to decide whether they want to move forward with the designation. You'll recall that you already issued your notice of intent to designate this building. It was then appealed, went to the Review Board. Their decision has no binding on the decision of Council from here forward. You could simply move forward as we've recommended to designate.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This reminds me, with exception of the Conservation Review Board aspect, of a situation that we had out in Hyde Park, was it last year or the year before, where there was a heritage property and also a really great proposal that would come, and we had to put on balance what's more important, the heritage or the future proposal here. And I would argue that out in Lambeth, I used to work there for quite a few years, there's not a whole lot of heritage that's been designated to date. So I see good value in keeping going forward where with the recommendation that we had set with going forward with the designation of this building.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and we certainly had a good discussion at committee. It was a split vote, as Councillor Turner noted. It was a 3-2, and I think every time we're dealing with a heritage designation issue, we have to be objective and look at, like, is this building worthy of heritage designation? We've dealt with that last year when we dealt with the actual designation of the building. We all supported it at that time. Nothing has changed in terms of the merits of designating the building. The Conservation Review Board took a look at it. They gave us their recommendation, but the facts about the building itself and the recommendation from our staff, they're not changing. And I think that it's an important building that's worthy of designation. And I want to emphasize that designation of a building as a heritage building does not mean it cannot be redeveloped or modified. That's why we have the heritage alteration permit process, and we can use that, and the applicant can use that. When we dealt with the zoning in 2015, this is over 2 years ago, we dealt with the zoning. At that time, there were 3 parcels. There was the sort of northern parcel, and there was the main parcel. And the main parcel is where the school building is located. And the proposal at that time was to make minor structural changes to the building, and that's it, retain it in its current form and redevelop it for pharmacy and wellness center. That's still possible. That's what the zoning is for, and that's what it supports. I don't know what the applicants run into that's made it probably more expensive to do what it is that the applicant wants to do in terms of redeveloping the site. It is usually cheaper to knock over the buildings and build a new building. That's why we have heritage designation as a way of saying, you know, we can't just knock over all the buildings and build new ones. We have to retain the ones that are important. I also want to say that heritage designation is not a popularity contest where only the buildings that have fans deserve to be designated. And so I understand that the community doesn't want to designate the building. I think that one of the reasons, and you see it in their communications, is that they really don't want a derelict building sitting there empty. That's what they really don't want. They want something new. They want something active on that site. And I think through the course of the discussion, it has seemed to people that if it is designated, it will be a derelict building forever. We have the heritage alteration permit process. If some changes need to be made to the building, or if parts of the building need to be conserved as part of redevelopment, that's still possible. Our staff can handle the application for a heritage alteration permit. We've delegated it to them to deal with those things. So I would encourage my colleagues to look at the objective attributes of the building, make your decision about heritage designation according to the criteria that set out in the Act. I think it's very clear that the building itself should be conserved.
Other speakers, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through you, this is my vote. I'll be supporting the ward councillor. If the citizens aren't interested in having that designated, then and would prefer something new in the area, then I think that's the best way to move forward. I was speaking to someone today about a building that they live in that a council had designated and said, well, we want to keep this and portions of it. And because of that, a lot of problems erupted in the building. And it was just a case of kind of council meddling with a property and forcing the developers to keep something that really didn't work well. And so I'm thinking about that right now while we make this. Councillor Helmer brought up an interesting point about buildings deserving to be designated, and I don't know. Does a building deserve something? I'm not sure if buildings deserve anything. I know that communities deserve something, and so that's where I'll be going with this. I think Councillor Turner makes a very good point about the setbacks, however. So I thought I would ask through the chair, just for comments on staff about that situation. So we find ourselves in a position where we're planning to have something be heritage, gave them a bigger setback, obviously because that's where the building was. But if they build something new, how should we deal with that? And is there a way to deal with that?
Well, Your Worship, when the zoning amendment application was applied for and being addressed, the intention was to demolish a good portion of this building, the rear portion, and adaptively reuse the remainder of the building. And in doing so, we recommended, and council approved a zone that included a setback to recognize that existing building, the heritage building. It's something that required a special provision. It's something that we wouldn't have done relative to, in terms of our recommendation, relative to development and its relationship to the street. This is set considerably back, and again, the intention was the adaptive reuse of a portion of the heritage building, and it's in relative terms. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but something in the order of a quarter of the building. The zoning bylaw amendment's in place now, so it's part of the zoning bylaw, and is not something that council has the authority to make a change on the decision they've already made. Of course, council could initiate a zoning amendment application. That'd be highly unusual.
Okay, thank you. So that would be an option for us. I recall hearing about a council-initiated zoning amendment. That's something I would be open to. But as far as on this vote, I think I'll support the councillor.
Other speakers? Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one question, if I may, through you to Mr. Fleming. I'm a little surprised to report that our heritage planner was not recognized as an expert and then was unable to present any evidence. So it seems like the review board was making a decision in somewhat of a vacuum. Can you clarify that for me?
My understanding from speaking with legal staff is that the evidence was submitted on the day of the hearing. That's something that is allowed by way of the practice of the review board. For whatever reason, the chair that was dealing with the hearing didn't see it that way, and I think that's what factored into the evidence. In fact, the expert testimony of Mr. Gagnon not being accepted as an expert witness. Now, that's my perspective from what I've heard. If you would like to hear it firsthand, you should hear it from our legal staff.
I don't need anything further on that, but it does seem that they didn't make a decision on the complete file of information that might have been available to them, and I think that's really unfortunate. I also do, I remember this being before planning in the first year of this term of council. I do remember our unanimous decision on that. I do believe that there is a way forward on this building. So as much as I hear from the community, I think the community has been told this is a mess and we can't do anything with it. And I think, no, I've seen things that it can be done with. And so I won't be supporting the decision of the committee at this time.
Other speakers? Okay, Councillor Usher, and then I'll speak to it after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, I'm not an expert in this at all, but I do know that I support heritage as much as I possibly can. In this particular case, I spoke to a couple of people out in the area. I do have relatives who live out there, by the way, and they're not the ones I spoke to about this. I spoke to other neighbors about it, and they just feel that this building has gone as far as it could go, and it's time that we move on, and that's the exact words that they used in me. So I think I'm going to vote in favor of the committee's recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hubert. This was a tough debate at committee. There's no question about that. You could tell that the ward councillor was really torn in the decision that she had to make. And you could tell that the community was really interested in seeing this medical building move forward. It was a difficult decision for me at committee as well. But I spoke about this at committee, and I'll say it again. Politics is about policy, and it's about people, and it's about finding the right balance. That's why from time to time, we move away from a policy that we might have as a council, for example, and make a decision, make an exception. I look at this building, I look at a community that is adamant about not wanting it, and Councillor Van Holst said this, then who are we identifying it as a heritage site for? The community doesn't want it. What the community is looking for is a medical building. They're asking for that. What the developer is telling us is that this project may not move forward with a designation, with the additional process that it's going to be required. And I had to ask myself, is it worth the risk? Is it worth the risk? When I'm speaking to members of that community, which I also have the privilege of representing, just as I have the privilege of representing residents that live across the city, what would my answer be to them if in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, nothing had changed? And I think that what they're looking for, what the developer's looking to put in the space, outweighs the benefit and the gain that we would receive by moving forward. And so, again, reluctantly and based on all of those reasons, I chose to support the community and the ward councillor at committee, and I'm going to do that again tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I turn to Councillor Squire.
Yes, I wasn't present for this debate, but I must say I'm a little bit concerned about the debate tonight, because when we sit and we make heritage decisions, Councillor Helmer's quite right. It's not a popularity contest. It's not people, you can't come in and say, well, by a majority of number of people, we don't want it to be heritage, therefore that carries weight. It isn't that kind of a test. It's a legal test. The problem with that, with us changing it and it becoming moving and doing it on a basis of popularity, is other decisions we make are going to become suspect, and people will come to us and say, well, geez, you designated this building as heritage, and we all came before you and said we wanted you to tear it down. So I think we're on shaky ground when we start doing these things a different way. I have to rely on what's being said by the committee members in making my decision. But in terms of the statements of the way we should be judging these things, I think Councillor Turner and Councillor Helmer are quite right that it's not a popularity contest. And so I just caution us to keep that in mind.
Any other speakers? Okay, no other speakers? Councillor Cassidy to wrap up.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I voted with the ward councillor at the planning committee meeting. It's important, I think, to remember that the Conservation Review Board report is, as staff told us, is a recommendation. It's not binding. But it is up to us to take that report and put it in the local context, consider it in the context of London, and that's how we have to make our decision. When we look back to what happened when the rezoning came through, I consider what the intention of the applicant was as part of my decision-making. And the intention of the applicant in working with staff was to incorporate this building as part of their design. Now, we've learned a lot in the years that have passed, and I think as an example, the Camden Terrace application. We didn't give permission to rezone. We didn't designate the building right away. We asked staff to continue to work with the proponent. And what happened was, I think, a good compromise and a good balance and an incorporation of those beautiful buildings in the design of the new building going forward. So would we do something differently if that rezone came before us for this Colonel Talbot Road building? I believe we would, and so I think we have to learn from what's happened now. As staff, I think, have learned. Sorry, I'm spitting. As staff have learned in having our staff recognized as an expert witness. The chair of this review board, if you read the report thoroughly, felt that the proponents' complaints were valid and that they weren't given enough time to respond with their own expert witness to rebut what our expert witness would have testified. Now, he wasn't recognized officially as an expert witness, but Mr. Gagnon was allowed to testify at that hearing, and he was allowed to present his report as the staff member who prepared the report for council. So he was heard at the hearing, and his evidence was on the record, and the review board acknowledged that his expertise was greater than the witness that testified for the applicant. The review board recognized that Mr. Gagnon's expertise and his qualifications outweighed the opposing expert, and he wasn't even acknowledged as an expert, but the opposing viewpoint. So, about the building itself, it has been irrevocably altered. And the main portion that would be incorporated into a new design would be the front. The front has been changed drastically. There was a beautiful front facade. If you looked at the historical pictures, the front door has been bricked up. The pillars have been changed. The portico over the front entrance, where the front entrance used to be, is gone. And it's been replaced with something completely different, completely unattractive. I know this is not a popularity contest or a beauty contest, but part of the things that would make this a heritage building are gone. I think also of what happened in Ward 5 at 660 Sunningdale when we designated two of the barns, and I tried to designate the third barn, but it did not pass. And I think of the differences in the Lambeth area and in Ward 5. In Ward 5, my argument was that there are not a lot of heritage structures left in Ward 5. There may be one left after those barns. I believe there are more in Lambeth and there are more opportunities. And this is not the only opportunity to save and recognize heritage in the Lambeth area. And I also note the difference in those two properties is that the community was 100% behind saving those barns. And I also acknowledge that it is not a popularity contest in the community, but the community knows their area better than anybody else. And they recognized the barns as substantial heritage structures in Ward 5, something that they see, they're landmarks because they sit up high on the hill. But the community in Lambeth does not recognize this as an important piece of their area. There are other areas that far outweigh this building. So these are all of the reasons why I supported the ward councillor. I wouldn't say because of those things that the community doesn't share the ward councillor's perspective on heritage. I just think that they don't consider this particular building an important heritage feature in the Lambeth area. And I'm sure that if the councillor championed other buildings, she would have the community behind her. I think if there are opportunities during site plan as things go forward with the new development that we can alter the setback, I think they want the setback absolutely went with the saving, the incorporation of the old building. So if there are opportunities to change that and make this the best design and building for the area, then I think staff should be encouraged to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Salee. Anyone else?
Through you, I just had a question to staff. Is there any heritage incentives for this, or would there be anything that would apply?
Mr. Fleming.
Your Worship, there is a citywide heritage community improvement plan that council offers to those that retain heritage buildings and incorporate them into new development. That could include development charges, incentives, grants relating to that, as well as tax-back grants. So this is understanding that there are sometimes costs that go along with heritage conservation, incorporating heritage buildings into new development, and this is a way that council provides some leveling of the playing field so that that kind of development can be feasible.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question. I guess monetary-wise or percentage-wise, do you have an example of kind of maybe how that would look? Would it be like, would it mitigate a significant amount of it, or just, you know, with kind of just the added work that kind of needs to go in?
Well, Your Worship, the maximum amount of the grants is equal to the costs that go along with the heritage conservation. So depending on the magnitude of that conservation, that would serve as the magnitude of the grant. Now it's possible it could be less than that if the development charges and the increase in taxes that occur as a result of the redevelopment accumulate to less than the cost of conservation, but it gives you some sense of the magnitude.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question that's before us.
Closing the vote, and the motion is lost, 5-9.
Okay.
Your Worship,
Councillor Turner.
put forward the staff report, or the staff recommendation.
Okay, so the staff recommendation is being brought forward. Just give Ms. Westlake Power a moment to bring that up on screen. Anyone want to speak to the staff recommendation? It's been moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Helmer. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 9-5.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll put number 13 on the floor. I think that's with respect to property at 440 Gray Street.
Colleagues, I'll remind you that a member declared a conflict on clause 13. Are there any speakers? Okay.
If I may go further, it's actually the 10th report of the London Advisory Committee on Heritage, which includes a provision on 440 Gray
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Turner. There are no speakers. Let's call the question. We are voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-1 with 1 recuse.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Let's move then to the Community and Protective Services Committee. Councillor Salih, and Councillor Salih and I were talking earlier, colleagues, clause 13, partnership to establish London as a UN Women's Safe City. I understand a number of people are coming from ANOVA and other community organizations, other community partners, and so we're hoping to deal with that after 5:50, when the bulk of the attendees are expected to be here. Over to you, Councillor Salih.
All right, it's over to me now, so I'll look for any items that want to be pulled. Someone wants to speak to number 6? Just a comment. Anyone else?
Councillor Turner.
May I request number 10 with respect to my conflict of interest?
10 to be pulled? Yeah. Okay. Other speak? Yep. Councillor or Deputy Mayor Hubert? 7. Okay, so we are going to deal with 7 and 10 separately, and Councillor Squire is going to speak. Yeah, let's do that now. So we'll do move the bulk of this with the exception of 7, 10, and 13.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to acknowledge that this work is moving forward. I probably ranted about this a number of times, the importance and the relationship between mental health issues and addiction. I'm sure you're getting tired. Sometimes I get tired of, believe it or not, listening to myself rant about certain things. But this is so important, and it's something that I think Dr. Mackey sort of referred to the other night, which is, or it was last night, when he said that there's a lot of other work and it's interrelated and it's complicated, and this is another area that's so important. So I just wanted to recognize that we're moving forward with it, and I'm really, really happy that it is. And again, it's part of the important work that's being done in this area.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Any other speakers? Councillor Helmer and Morgan.
On clause number 9, I think this is an important request that we're going to make of the province to increase social assistance rates. We had a good discussion at committee. I don't want to rehash that, but I do think it's an important and significant request of the provincial government.
Other speakers? Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I'm going to make comments on 2 items. One is right on the heels of Councillor Helmer's comment on number 9. I know that the direction coming from the committee is not only to support the campaign, but requests that the mayor write a letter to the minister and inform our members of provincial parliament about our desires here. I also would say we have an opportunity in the near future when our members of provincial parliament come and engage with the Corporate Services Committee to potentially have this as one of the items on the agenda to discuss with them. It's great because we have representatives from each of the parties there, and I think it's a real opportunity for us to consider this as one of those agenda items for our meetings with MPPs. We've certainly discussed a lot of our council priorities last time. I think that as this is becoming a council priority, it would probably be appropriate for us to use that as an opportunity as well. I'm not going to make a motion. I'm just going to make the comment here and look to the chair and our government relations working group to consider that. Our Government Affairs Office, I should say, to consider that as part of the agenda setting. On number 12, which is an item in my ward, I appreciate that the committee decided to take no action, and I also wanted to thank our bylaw area. I know that I have worked with them on this particular file through the course of a number of years, and they have been out to that site multiple times. I know it is of great frustration to the resident that it has not been satisfied to their satisfaction, but I know that it has been measured. I know that it has been out there, and it's simply not a situation where bylaw can take action on this. I know the resident could take their own action with the bylaw, record their own information. I know that they came to committee. I think committee dealt with this appropriately. As unfortunate as it is for the resident, it's probably the right course of action. And I did want to thank our staff for the work that they have done on this file, coming out multiple times to try to help remedy this for the resident.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did pull 7, but it really is more 9 than 7. And I just want to say this, that in the 10 years I've been on council, I've never spoken to something that actually pertains to Ontario Works. But this is not about my pecuniary interest, because this is about the people that receive funds through Ontario Works. And I wanted to say one thing, as I was reviewing the material, as I always do on this particular matter, that what struck me is that at the same time we're raising the minimum wage in the province of Ontario because people need to have enough money upon which to clothe themselves and house themselves and feed themselves, that some of our most marginalized people in our cities and in our province are really struggling to do that. And yet, 2 words came to my mind. These are some of the most resilient people I have ever met in 30 years of working with people across 3 continents, and they're also some of the most resourceful people I have ever met in 30 years of working across 3 continents. And I don't ever want us to see those who are in receipt of Ontario Works as people anything less than being resourceful and resilient. So I support the campaign. I support what our staff are doing, the outstanding work that our OW staff do with folks in the community. But I want us to remember who it is that this is all about: resourceful and resilient citizens of the City of London.
Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Salee?
I'm not seeing anything else, so I guess call a question. I thought that was your job.
You do it well. Let's get that vote opened up. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Clause 7, Councillor Salee. And I think that was pulled, but it's already been spoken to.
Okay, great. So I'll move that.
Good. Moved by Councillor Salee. Any other speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Clause 10, Councillor Salee.
Clause 10, I believe that was pulled by one of the members of council.
Councillor Turner.
Not to speak, just conflict.
We have no speakers. Moved by, you want to speak, Councillor Salee? Please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I see Councillor Van Hulst here, but I did have a question for legal, but.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So I know this is coming back on the 4th, I believe. Is that the date? And so one thing I just wanted to mention through you to staff, I was speaking with a woman who she herself has been trafficked in the past. She actually teaches in one of the John schools, and she talked about a program that happens in Florida where they have trafficking posters have to be put up in these types of places, and basically they just describe the type of person who's being trafficked, what things are happening that you might fall into this category, because there's often very young women who are just unaware of the situation that they're in. And I think this might be something that could be helpful, might be something that we could include in our own bylaws as well. And what would happen is they would read the poster, see the points on it, and then be able to see who they can contact to get them out of a situation that they may not even recognize. So I just put that off to staff. Maybe it's something to consider.
Mr. Cotola.
Your Worship, we considered this type of regulation, but it would be very difficult from an enforcement perspective to ensure that those posters stay up in these facilities.
Okay, and I have Councillor Salee.
Thank you, and through you, I just had a question. It's legal. I know this has come up in the past, but I know recently a community stakeholder has asked us again as council, just in respect to us when it comes to adult live entertainment bylaws, is this, they've said that this is just solely outside of our jurisdiction, so I just want to know if maybe we'll get some sort of a response to that in open session.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I understand the question to be whether or not municipalities can regulate adult entertainment parlors, and the answer, of course, is yes. It's expressly permitted under the Municipal Act and permitted in the context of a licensing regime, a business licensing regime. Bylaws that a municipality pass must not conflict with upper government legislation, provincial or federal. This bylaw does not conflict with any provincial or federal legislation, and in that regard, it's fully within the municipality's jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Oh, any additional speakers? Okay, with that, I'll call the question. It's been moved by Councillor Salee. We'll open the vote. And we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13 with 1 recuse.
Okay, we are a model of efficiency. This is the efficiencies of government at play here, and clause 13, we've had a request from the community to hold that until 5:50. So to the chair of the committee, I asked if you'd move a change in order. It'll come up on screen in a moment, and then we'll circle back at the appropriate time.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Salee, seconded by Councillor Usher. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
And that is almost all of my report.
Tune in next time. 25th report of the Corporate Services Committee. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will put the entire report on the floor. I've had no calls, no questions.
And we have no speakers. So perfect, that's coming up. This is clause 1 through 5. That's up on screen. It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
And that brings us to the 7th report of the Audit Committee.
Since we're being so efficient, I would be remiss if I didn't extend best wishes to our colleague on his birthday today.
Oh,
to Councillor Squire. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. 30 years old.
Well preserved.
That's my shoes, actually.
On that odorous note, I will put the entire report of the Audit Committee on. And I do want to turn, if I may, Mr. Mayor, to the draft internal audit charter. And this is something that we've never had at the City of London. There's been a great deal of work put into this, both from our auditors as well as from staff. And it really sets the rules of the road, if you will, the rules of engagement of internal auditors with our staff and with the audit committee. I think it's a great step forward. It's quite detailed, but it really sets the relational standard on a go-forward basis. So I'll put the report on the floor. I'll make the motion and await your discussion.
Okay, I have a growing speakers list. No? Let's call the question. voting. Deputy Mayor Hubert, I wonder if we could go for a hat trick here, and if you'd consider presenting the SPPC in a moment. Report from last evening.
Closing the vote, carries 13-0.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will put the entire report on. I think we deliberated long and hard last night on it. Not long enough? Oh, I'm sorry.
So let's identify those conflicts.
Councillor, Clause 5 and Clause 7, there's conflicts, so we'll...
7C and 16, just for my vote.
Okay, so we'll do all of Clause 5. We'll deal with 7C separately. So we'll deal with 7. Councillor Ridley?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. There's one item, and I'm not seeing the number right now. Sorry, I believe it's item 2, that I would like pulled separately, not to speak to, but just to vote.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor Hubert, I see that as 2, 5, and 7 dealt with separately. Councillor Morgan?
Yes, I really only have a conflict on 7A, so that just needs to be separate. And 11 is the other one that I have a conflict on.
Okay, so we'll deal with the balance of the report with the exception of 2, 5, 7, and 10. When we get to 7, we have some members who have identified a conflict on a portion of that clause, some members who have indicated an interest in voting nay to only portions of that clause. So we'll deal with 7 separately. So the balance, with the exception of 2, 5, 7, and 10, over to you, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
11.
And 16.
11.
And 11, okay. So Ms. Westlake Power?
No, just
2, 5, 7, 11, 16. This is really helpful to get us to 550, so I think it's much appreciated by Inova. Can we add 16 to that list, please, Ms. Westlake Power? Not on the list. Oh, 1 to 15.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nice. Good old math. Thank you. So let's call the question unless there are any speakers.
closing the vote, and the motion carries 13-0.
Okay, let's have clause 2. So we'll deal with 2. We want to deal with 2B separately. So all of clause 2 with the exception of 2B, and then we'll deal with 2B second time around. Okay, that's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any discussion on 2A? We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13-0.
And 2B? Any speakers to 2B? There are no speakers, so we'll wait for that to come up on screen. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-1.
Clause 5. Just while we're waiting for the language to come up on screen, any speakers to 5? Okay. That's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. We'll call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries, 12 with 1 recuse.
Okay, we're going to have to break 7 up a little bit. Let's deal with 7B, D, and E first. We'll deal with 7A and C separately. Okay, that's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any speakers? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries, 13-0.
Let's go to 7A. It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Squire. Closing the vote, and the motion carries, 12 with 1 recuse.
Okay, 7C. That's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's call the question unless there are any speakers. There are no speakers. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries, 11-2.
Okay, Clause 11. This is the request for a second term appointment to the University of Western Ontario Board of Governors. Michael Lerner is the individual identified. Any speakers to 11? Okay, we'll just have it come up on screen. We'll look to Deputy Mayor to move that.
I was asking if we can do 11 to 14, but I understand that there's a conflict in one of them.
Yeah, we've done 14 and 15. We've got to do 16 next after 11. Okay, moved. And there are no speakers. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries, 12 with 1 recuse.
Okay, there seems to have been a glitch in the system. That appears on screen as moved by Councillor Helmer and seconded by Councillor Ridley, but the minutes will reflect that it was moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert because it was a recommendation out of committee. So that'll get fixed. And finally, this is item 16, Clause 16, Amazon Headquarters 2, request for proposal. Any speakers? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Unfortunately, I had to leave the meeting early last night, so I didn't get to debate this, and I promised Councillor Squire I wouldn't debate it tonight. I just want to say that I agreed with him, and that's my birthday present to him, so thanks.
Excellent. We were really hoping for a 5-minute speech because we have a 5:50 item, but that's okay. Happy birthday, Councillor Squire. Councillor Morgan.
My birthday present to Councillor Squires, I will make no effort to try to convince Councillor Cassidy on this one.
Any other speakers? I've never been able to, so. Okay. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Councillor.
I'm going to leave it because I have to moderate.
Councillor Helmer?
Do you want to do closed session before that?
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-2.
Okay, colleagues, looking for a volunteer to report out on the 21st report of council in closed session. Lots of reading. You can show us how fast you can read. Councillor Cassidy? Great, thank you. And just one moment, Deputy Mayor Hubert, let's get this up on screen.
Who's going to do it?
Councillor Cassidy. For those in attendance, this is what happens at the end of a meeting, normally around 11 o'clock at night when everyone's turned off their television. There's a number of housekeeping items that take place, and so you might be sitting there wondering why we're doing it now. We have held the Safe Cities Initiative, the UN, to 10 to 6. We'll deal with that shortly after this report, and by making that change, we were able to move our way through the agenda. This is also, we're being exceptionally efficient today, and I'm not bragging, I'm just stating that as a fact that normally we'd be about 9 or 10 o'clock at this point. Councillor Cassidy. Point of personal privilege, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
I'm just helping you with your timing here. So, if I may, thank you, Councillor Cassidy, for helping out reading that. I'm going to be exiting the meeting. I want councillors to know, and I certainly want members of the public to know that it has absolutely nothing to do with the Safe Cities Initiative. I'm very, very supportive of that initiative, and I think it's wonderful we're moving forward with that. However, I'm moderating a panel at the Family Court Clinic at their AGM on another aspect of our which is the voice of the child in legal proceedings and how we can encourage that. So with your indulgence and permission, I'll be exiting the meeting, but I wanted to make sure that it had nothing to do with Safe Cities.
Thanks for letting us know. Deputy Mayor Hubert, over to you, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I thought I was just going to be reporting progress, so I've said yeah. So I'm pleased to report that, or present the 21st report of the Council in closed session. Your Committee of the Whole reports: 1, industrial land exchange pertaining to an access for the 23.9 acre parcel C5 at Huron Industrial Park. That as a procedural matter pursuant to Section 239(6) of the Municipal Act 2001, the following recommendation be forwarded to Council in closed session for the purpose of considering whether the recommendation should be forwarded to Council for deliberation and a vote in public session. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the following actions be taken with respect to the acquisition of lands required for a dedicated access for the 23.9 acre parcel known as C5 at Huron Industrial Park and the disposal of part of the 23.9 acre parcel C5 to the abutting property owner. A, the offer submitted as Schedule B by 033 Development Corporation to sell to the city a portion of the lands located on the north side of Jetstream Road, further described as part of Lot 2, Concession 2 in the geographic township of London, City of London, County of Middlesex, being parts 78, 79, and part of Part 82 on Plan 33R-4254, being part of PIN 0812601115, to be defined on a reference plan to be deposited in the City of London, County of Middlesex, containing an area of approximately 0.84 acres for the purpose of an access for the 23.9 acre parcel referred to as C5 at Huron Industrial Park for the sum of $2, be accepted, subject to the following conditions. 1, the city having 30 days from acceptance to satisfy itself as to the title of the property. 2, the city accepting the property on an as-is basis. 3, the completion of the transaction being conditional upon the completion of the transaction pursuant to an agreement between the city and the 033 Development Corporation with respect to the lands described as part of the north half of Lot 2, Concession 2, in the geographic township of London, City of London, County of Middlesex, as part of Part 15 in Plan 33R 1376, being part of PIN 08-126-0018, to be defined on a reference plan to be deposited in the City of London, County of Middlesex. 4, the city agreeing to prepare and deposit a reference plan on title on or before the closing. And 5, the city agreeing to accept title to the property subject to an easement in favor of Sun Canadian. And B, the offer submitted as Schedule C by 033 Development Corporation to purchase from the city the lands located on the south side of Veterans Memorial Parkway and north of Jetstream Road, further described being part of the north half of Lot 2, Concession 2 in the geographic township of London, City of London, County of Middlesex, as part of Part 15 on Plan 33R-1376, being part of PIN 08-126-0018, to be defined on a reference plan to be deposited in the City of London, County of Middlesex, containing an area of approximately 2.16 acres for the sum of $2, be accepted subject to the following conditions. 1, the purchaser having 30 days from acceptance to satisfy itself as to the title of the property. 2, the purchaser accepting the property on an as-is basis. 3, the completion of the transaction being conditional upon the completion of the transaction pursuant to an agreement between the city and the 033 Development Corporation with respect to the lands described as part of Lot 2, Concession 2, in the geographic township of London, City of London, County of Middlesex, being parts 78, 79, and part of Part 82 on Plan 33R-4254, being part of PIN 08-126-0115, to be defined on a reference plan to be deposited in the City of London, County of Middlesex. And 4, the city accepting that the sale of the property to the purchaser not be subject to bylaw A-6151-17, titled Disposal of Industrial Land Procedures. I'm on to number 2 now. Property acquisition, 26 Wellington Road South Shift Rapid Transit Project. That, as a procedural matter pursuant to Section 239(6) of the Municipal Act 2001, the following recommendation be forwarded to Council in closed session for the purpose of considering whether the recommendation should be forwarded to Council for deliberation and a vote in public session. That, on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, with the concurrence of the Managing Director of Environment and Engineering Services and City Engineer, the Director, Roads and Transportation, and the Project Director, Rapid Transit Implementation, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the following actions be taken with respect to the property located at 26 Wellington Road South, further described as Lot 19, Plan 11, having a lot size of approximately 33 by 133 feet, as shown on the location maps for the purpose of future road improvements to accommodate shift. A, the offer submitted by Marilyn Carol Bates to sell the subject property to the city for the sum of $169,900 be accepted, subject to the following conditions. 1, the city having the right to view the property 2 further times prior to closing. 2, the city assuming the rental contract for the hot water tank. 3, the transaction including all existing fixtures and chattels. And B, the financing for this acquisition be approved as set out in the source of financing report hereto as Appendix A.
Bravo.
That was Councillor Squire's birthday present. Riveting. Thank you very much. And I'll look for any speakers. I'll look for Councillor Cassidy to move that. Thank you. Councillor Turner.
I mean, with respect to the property at whatever it is, 26 Wellington Road South, it's in proximity to my house, and so I'll declare a conflict of pecuniary interest.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a pecuniary interest declared. Any other speakers? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Counselor Park? Closing the vote and the motion carries, 11 with 1 recused.
Excellent. Let's move back then to the Community and Protective Services report. This is Clause 13, the partnership to establish London as a UN Women's Safe City.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll put that forward, and I'll look for speakers.
Any speakers on this? Councillor Park?
Thank you. Very supportive of moving forward with this, but I just wonder about the reporting. Back in the communication from April, it was noted that Marcel out of the mayor's office would be reporting directly to the mayor. So I just want to make sure that council will, this is a council initiative. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, the initial stages of the application process, just working with the UN, they needed to have identified an individual who's their contact. By us approving this today, now it becomes a council initiative, and so the group will report back to council. The language, I think, is by December of 2018, we can expect that report back to come much sooner than that, based on the comments we heard at the meeting. Thank you. Any other questions? Any other speakers? Okay, I will just quickly from the chair acknowledge that many representatives from ANOVA are here, as well as other community agencies that are very supportive of this initiative. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be here today. ANOVA is an organization with 80 years of experience and expertise in this area. 1 in 3 Canadian women will experience sexual assault in their lifetime. London is not immune to that. That's no different here in our community. And ANOVA also has answered over 1,000 calls on their sexual assault crisis line and served over 750 individual survivors. And from my perspective, I feel very confident that this is the group to lead, and they're not going to do it alone. There are going to be many other community agencies that will be working hand in hand as they move forward to be one of Canada's first safe cities. And so it's phenomenal work. Thank you for taking this on. A lot of work ahead. I'm sorry that we have to do this work in our community, but as a community, we're going to stand together and make sure that it gets done. So to everyone here, thanks for taking the time. I'm going to hand things over to the chair in case he wants to close things off, and then we're going to call the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not seeing any other speakers on this, but I just want to reiterate what the mayor said. During committee, there was a lot of support from committee members, some great discussions, and I want to thank all those people who presented and all those people who attended in helping us shape and create a more safer community for all those members in our community, from young girls to women, and thank you for your courage.
And with that, let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries, 12-0.
Unanimous support. Thanks again for being here tonight. Okay, colleagues, let's move through the agenda. Deferred matters. There are none. Inquiries. None. Emergent motions. None. Okay, we're going to move on to bylaws. We've got a couple, I think, of added bylaws. Clerk Saunders.
Through Mr. Mayor, we actually have quite a number as a result of last night's Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, all of the policies that you approved last night. So we have added bill numbers 424 to 573. And as a result of the closed session report that Councillor Cassidy just presented, we also have added bill numbers 574 and 575, of which Councillor Turner has a conflict on 576.
Okay, so we've identified a conflict on Bill 576. Any other bills that you'd like called separately? Any other bylaws? Okay. So if we can deal with the balance of the bylaws, we'll deal with 576 after that. First reading, moved by Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Ridley. Let's call the question. We're voting.
What's 24? Nothing's
Yep.
That moment when you think you're voting for the bylaw.
Yeah.
Closing the vote and the motion carries, 12-0.
Second reading, all bills with the exception of 576. Any speakers? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. On Bill 413, this is to establish a new multi-unit residential class. I'm glad to see that we're making this one more small step towards property tax fairness. I know it's something I've talked about a lot at Corporate Services Committee. This is one more thing that I think we can do to make the property tax system a little bit more fair for all people, no matter what kind of buildings they're living in. I'm glad to see us moving forward.
Other speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Third and final reading for all bylaws with the exception of Bill 576. Moved by Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, let's deal with one final item. Then we'll take a recess to 6:20 when we'll be recognizing 25-year employees. So this is Bill 576. First reading, we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recused.
And second reading, Bill 576. Any speakers? Moved by Councillor Van Hol, second by Councillor Helmer. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recused.
Third reading, Bill 576. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recused.
Okay, colleagues, it's 6:02. We were intending to recognize 25-year employees at 6:20. I'm told by the deputy clerk that everyone's here, so we can just move forward. That's perfect. And if we could let Rhonda know upstairs that we might be a bit early for dinner, I think that would be excellent as well. Wonder if I could have Mr. Hayward, if you join me, please. So colleagues, as you know, it's a tradition in the fall to recognize many of our employees, all of our employees who have achieved 25 years of service in 2017. Councillor Salee will be upstairs at dinner talking about what he was doing 25 years ago. I think we'll all be very interested. We'll be dealing with a number of groups today, from engineering and environmental services, from finance and corporate services, from legal and corporate services, and from parks and recreation services. This is a really proud moment for us here at the City of London. I'm going to speak a little bit further once all of our 25-year employees have come into the chamber. But to the families and to the friends, thank you so much for being here to celebrate as well. I'm joined by our city manager, Mr. Martin Hayward, and we'll call our employees out one at a time. And employees would ask that you'd stay in the council horseshoe, just lining up over by Councillor Zafman's seat, and we'll work our way around. So with that, over to you, Clerk Saunders.
From the Environmental and Engineering Services area, Ann Boyd.
Wow, congratulations. Great to see you.
Thanks very much. Paul Hawks.
Hey, Paul. Congratulations.
Ken Lanigan. Douglas M. Law. Michael Charles Overton.
Congratulations, 25 years. Wow, thank you.
John Whitworth.
Yeah, congratulations.
And John Woolsey.
Hey, John. Thanks for coming. Congratulations.
Also celebrating 25 years of service from an environmental and engineering services, but unable to attend, are Tracy Atkinson, Carl Belitka, Brian Calhoun, Danny Cardelli, John Chatterson, Brad Cook, Daryl DeCoste, Mark Elliott, William B. Guacme, Rick J. Cook, Keith Latimer, Ray Marino, Robert J. Moore, John S. Parsons, Dean Wesley Prentice, Ron Sutka, and Mark Van Eye. Celebrating 25 years of service from Finance and Corporate Services, Rosalie Levy.
Congratulations.
Stuart McCullough.
Congratulations.
Terry Ewer. Also celebrating 25 years of service from Finance and Corporate Services, Nancy Frederick, Josephine Lopez, Shannon Manders, Larry Pilarchio, and Devin Walsh. And the next two are near and dear to our hearts, Kathy and I. From Legal and Corporate Services, Dominic Anello. And John Andrew Danaskas. Also celebrating 25 years of service from Legal and Corporate Services, Mary Goss, Don Sylvester, and Deb Varney. From Parks and Recreation Services, Richard Bender.
Hey, Richard. Thank you.
Jeff Bogle.
Go that way now. Why don't we come over here, Martin?
Dave Cambridge. And William C. Coxhead. Jim Howard.
25 years in each.
Evan F. P. Jones. Grant Murphy. And Scott Priest. Also celebrating 25 years of service from Parks and Recreation Services are Phil Martin and Alan Moore. And those are your 25-year celebrants.
So, to everyone here, to the families, and to the friends that have come to celebrate as well, 25 years is an incredible milestone. I know that probably each of you at some point over the course of the day as you were preparing to come to council chambers reflected back on 25 years ago today of what you were doing. Made that decision to come and work for the City of London, and it's my pleasure, it's my privilege on behalf of City Council to say thank you for making the choice that you did. Because you could have chosen to work anywhere. You could have chosen to work anywhere, you could have chosen to do. You chose a life of service. You chose to work for London. London's now 400,000. We offer over 100 different programs and services, $1 billion budget, thousands and thousands and thousands of employees. And it's not easy. It's not easy in any service area. But what you're doing each and every day when you come to work, when you serve London, is essentially Londoners' lives better, their quality of life. It doesn't matter what department, it doesn't matter what division, that's what's happening. And so I hope today, as you come upstairs to join us for dinner with council, with members, and with family and friends, reflect on that too. London owes you a debt of gratitude. Thrilled that you chose to work for the City of London and made it to this incredible milestone of 5 years. So we'll be upstairs in a few minutes to join you for dinner. This is a good time to go and catch the elevator. We have to adjourn the meeting. Stories about the City of London and working here over the past. Together? Yeah. Well, colleagues, I believe that brings us to the end of our agenda. I will look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Ridley, seconded by Councillor Park. Any discussion? Let's call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Meeting's adjourned. We'll see you upstairs when we celebrate with our 25-year employees.
Told you 6:30.